Okay, a year on, we're back with the Honeycomb Bravo throttle quad alongside its older brother, the Alpha flight yoke. If you've watched along on my channel, you'll know that when the Alpha was released, I pre-ordered and got one of the earlier Alpha yokes. I was very interested to see how that worked. I put quite a lot of effort into reviewing that yoke. I made quite a few videos, notably around chasing down and trying to understand the dead zones, and subsequently how to fix the dead zones in the yoke, and that was very well received. Surprisingly enough, very well received by Honeycomb, who subsequently sent me for review the Bravo Throttle quad, and that was a very successful review. Got 20-odd thousand views in the first week. Very successful by my standards anyway. It's a great product. You know, I've continued to regard this as a great product, very flexible, very full-featured for the price, and it still sells very well. So what we're doing today is we're revisiting that, and we're going to look at some of the accessories that are available for the Bravo Throttle quad. And I have to say, Honeycomb were nice enough to send me a bunch of those to look at. And so today we're going to be looking at the Airbus Throttle pack add-on. Say more about that in a little while. We're going to look at the General Aviation trim wheel add-on, very peculiar add-on to say more about. And lastly, we've got the dust cover for the Bravo quad, or indeed for the Alpha yoke. So take a look at that as well. So starting with the Airbus lever pack. Now I don't fly Airbuses. I don't really favour the large passenger jets at all. But you know, at the end of the day, this is a generic lever set which replaces one of the two standard lever sets. I'll just remind you, we've got the commercial jet levers fitted, which are by and large I think modelled on the Boeing style. I'm sure somebody will correct me on this if I'm wrong. Lever pack. So we've got the thrust reversers, and we've got the flap lever and the speed brake. But of course we do, with the quadrant, get supplied the General Aviation levers, which are the ones that I tend to use all the time up to now. But the Airbus levers are a replacement notionally for the commercial levers, and it says on the box for Airbus A319 to A380, so that's basically all the Airbuses. So we can set it up as a 2-engine or a 4-engine aircraft. So we're going to open the box, see what we get, and we're going to see how it's different to the standard setup. We get the same nice box, if that matters to you. We've got the little magnetic closure, and I guess, you know, this is it's not just a throwaway box. This is intended, if you're going to swap these in and out, you know, somewhere to keep the levers in. Now, first impressions weren't great, I have to admit, but first impressions are not everything. And you know, when you open the box, you see the same kind of shiny plastic as you see on the commercial levers that were included with the original product. Now, you may, if you watch my review, you know, remember that I wasn't too wild about the quality of these commercial levers. So when I opened the box, that was my first thought. But taking one of these out, you know, it is quite apparent that the build quality, at least to my eye, is substantially different. And I mean, they're hefty enough levers, and yes, they are made of that shiny plastic, but they do seem quite sturdy, and I mean, certainly sturdy enough. And you know, so first impressions don't really last once you take them out and handle them. And so what you do is, just like all the other levers, I mean, I won't do all this at great length on camera, but they just pull off and then push on. And you know, again, if you're not familiar with this, what you're going to find is the lever stubs have got electrical contacts on, at least some of them do. So this one has a switch on the end of the lever. That's an auto throttle disconnect switch, I believe. And we get, interestingly enough, we've got two of those. If we look at the other end of the stack, or the span, we've got two of those. The two middle levers are different. They have these little appendages on, which look like the thrust reversers on the original commercial levers, and indeed that is their function, but the implementation is different, and indeed, as we'll see, it's more characteristic of how things work in the Airbus aircraft. And again, if you look up inside one of these levers, you will see the electrical contacts that will mate with the contacts on the stub lever. Now, Interestingly enough, if this is just nerd stock really, if you compare this with the original commercial lever, which also has electrical contacts, you might be tempted to think that they do the same thing. In the original commercial levers, the thrust reverser is engaged through a switch. That's what the electrical contacts are for. Not so in this lever. We'll leave that enigmatic for now, and when we look at this in detail it should become clear. And then lastly, we've got two other stub levers to cover the other two positions. So we've got the speed brake, which is just basically a plastic stub that slots on there, and then we have a flap lever. Now the flap lever does the same job as the original flap or handle, if you like, in the standard commercial set, but it's more sophisticated. It's more sophisticated because it has a little spring action, and what you're going to find is when you slot that on and try and move the lever, it basically doesn't want to move, and you have to kind of lift that spring-loaded thing with two fingers before the lever will move. So it's a kind of a friction lock in a sense. There are no detents in the flap movement, but nevertheless, this, it's much more positive engagement, and it just, the feel of it is just, I have to say, more convincing and more professional, if that makes any sense. So that's the lie of the land. Let's take a closer look at what these levers do. Okay, so we have the Airbus levers fitted now. We're in the idle position here. We've got a 4-engine setup. So, it's not rocket science. These are just throttle levers. You can move them forward. Interestingly enough, it's easier to move these all four one-handed. I don't know if you move them one-handed in the real aircraft. Obviously, maybe you got the co-pilot operating the thrust levers and doing it two-handed. I don't know. But it is easy to do one-handed. I'm presuming these are not full-size like the original commercial levers. They're kind of scaled down, but they're large enough to be manipulated easily. Now there's two surprises in the design and the operation of these levers. If you plug them in and try to go, you might be surprised. I mean, maybe not if you're familiar with Airbus aircraft. The first surprise is the middle two levers with the thrust reversers. Now I'm given to understand that only two thrust reverse levers is correct, even in an A380. So it's not that we're missing two thrust reverse levers for cost-cutting reasons or anything like that. That's authentic, but they don't operate in the way you might expect if you come from the Boeing style thrust reversers. And it's quite ingenious how they do operate. If I just put these two end levers out of the way, you will know that on this, or you may not know, but if you buy the throttle quad, the Bravo quad, each of the levers has this kind of positive range, and then there's a detente, or a detent, if you want to pronounce it that way, and then you have to push it through. I mean, that means different things according to how it's set up, but it can be your thrust reverse. But what you're going to find is, although the outer two power levers will pull straight into that detente, the middle two won't. The action of this thrust reverse lever is actually a mechanical unlock. There's a little stub which you'll see if you look at the end of this lever, which pops, maybe you'll even see that at this distance, it pops in and out according to the setting of that lever. So it's not an electrical switch at all, it's a mechanical switch, and so in operation that either prevents or allows passage into that detente. So that's actually a really nice and a really positive feeling switch. And the other thing is, if the switch is latch, so you can latch them open. If you pull it through and then release them, it will allow you to do that, and then when you push it back through the gate, you can hear that positive click and it's locked again. So I'm presuming in real life you pull those to unlock the detents and then pull all four levers through. Unless there's only reverse on two engines. I mean, maybe that's how it works. So that's the thrust reverse operation. The next surprise is, if we take these levers off, and let's imagine we want to set it up for a two-engine aircraft. So that would be a, I don't know, A319 or 320. I'm on thin ice here. I don't really know anything about Airbuses. We've got what seems like a problem, which is we want the two thrust reverse levers, but we also want these auto throttle disconnect levers. buttons, sorry, which are on the wrong levers, and there's no obvious way around that. But surprise, well, there's two surprises here, again, which you may or may not discover by fiddling around. The first surprise is that button actually pops off, and it's magnetic. There's two electrical contacts on there and on there, and that's these are left and right, presumably, because there's an L on this one and presumably an R on the other one, and it pops back on, and that's a very positive magnetic connection. And there's a little lip, which means once it's in there it can't slide off or anything like that. So unless you scrutinise this very closely, you wouldn't even know that wasn't attached. So the trick is that pops off there, and but then it's not clear why initially. And I'm saying that because you might imagine, which is indeed the case, that you want to take it off and pop it onto the middle lever, but it doesn't seem to have the same electrical contacts on there. But to cut a long story short, there is actually a little cover on here, and again it's held on, it's obviously got a little steel bit on there, it's held on by the same magnet very positively, so you wouldn't know it's there. But you take that off, take care not to drop the button on the floor, and then you pop that auto throttle disconnect button on. It only goes on one way, it's keyed, there's a little ridge on the perimeter there, or one at each side, so it's keyed, so it goes in correctly. So that's on your middle lever now. You do the same on the right hand lever, stick that on, take that one off, and of course those covers, you don't want to lose them, they go over the magnetic part of the, I mean if you do lose them it's no great sweat, it just visually doesn't look quite as nice. So you stick them in the box. I guess what you can do then is to be tidy, you can put on your covers for the unused slots. I'll just do that so it looks tidy. And there you are, you're good to go with your 2-engine Airbus setup. So that feels pretty cool. I guess most people are going to be flying the 2 engines at the moment. Has anyone made an A380 for flights in 2020? So in use, as I say, you don't have to, this is not really Airbus specific, I mean it is notionally, but in practice you can use this setup to fly anything you want. And those auto throttle disconnect buttons, again, I mean you don't have to map those to auto throttle disconnect, you can map those to whatever you want, push to torque, autopilot disconnect, whatever you want really. So not much more to say about that. In use, the one, this is the same criticism I had of the standard levers, whether the GA or the commercial ones. There is some, side-to-side flexibility, which when you're, I guess particularly if you're going to go for those auto throttle disconnect, the levers kind of bang together, which, that's a tiny thing, that's of no real consequence in use. In real life these would be very stiff, made of titanium or aluminium, something like that. But I think on balance, compared to the original commercial levers, there's not a lot to choose from in quality. Maybe I was a bit harsh with these originally, but I do think that mechanical lockout is a real nice feature, and there's something about the construction of this that just feels a little bit more robust than the originals. So your mileage may vary. It is kind of an expensive add-on. These retail for about £85, I think, in the UK. I think I have seen them for as low as 65, depending on where you're going to get them. Whether that's cost effective for you, not for me to say. I mean, arguably, for my money, the most practical upgrade that you're buying here is the flap handle with that friction lock. I kind of like that. I mean, I'd be tempted, even if I was flying with the other commercial levers, and even general aviation. If you were flying the Twin Otter, for example, that continuously variable flat position with the spring loading, arguably that's more realistic. So there you go, that's the Airbus Throttle pack from Honeycomb Aeronautical for the Bravo Throttle Quad, available wherever you can buy Honeycomb stuff. Alright, next up, the general aviation trim wheel add-on accessory, whatever you call it. Now this is a peculiar device. One of the most useful features of the Bravo Throttle Quad, apart from it being a throttle quad of course, is the addition of a trim wheel. A lot of people have been very excited about that, and it does add a great deal to the sim. So if you're a regular GA flyer, or indeed a commercial flyer who flies a lot by hand, you'll recognise that setting the aircraft trim is crucial. And often you have the option of electric trim by using the thumb buttons, but on a general aviation aircraft, many Cessna aircraft, the Twin Otter, many, traditionally you have this trim wheel. So you'd wind the wheel forward to trim the nose down, and you'd wind it backwards to trim the nose up. This operates in the sim as a pair of button clicks, by the way. This is not an analogue axis. Now the downside of this is, in some sense, it's modelled after the kind of trim wheel, I guess the motorised trim wheel in an airliner, and it's very loose, which is kind of unlike the kind of knobbly wheel you'd find embedded in the console of your Cessna, the lower console of your Cessna aircraft, which is a little bit more resistant to being turned. In this one you can actually spin it by hand. It's also difficult to grasp because it's kind of almost flush with the side of this pedestal that it's mounted on. So in practice you'd be manipulating this with your thumb and maybe forefinger in the sim, which is fine, but a lot of people have presumably wanted something a little bit more authentic for their smaller general aviation aircraft. Cue this add-on. And what we find is this rather strange, it's a cover basically. It's a slip-on plastic, well not plastic, it's rubberized, and what kind of synthetic material. And as far as I know, this is going to do three different things, which are all going to work in our favour. One is it's going to change the feel, the look and feel, that's four different things, of the wheel to have this knurled appearance. There'll be a tactile difference in the sense of manipulating this wheel. We've got kind of steps that we can, which your fingers will grab on. It's going to increase the diameter of the wheel, so it's going to hopefully project outside of that pedestal a little bit more. Generally you would operate this with your thumb and forefinger kind of, so maybe we're going to be able to do that. And lastly, I believe, I haven't tried this yet, but from reading the blurb, it's going to butt up against the side of this pedestal and give us a friction interface, which will mean that this thing isn't going to spin freely anymore. So I'm going to put this on. Well, that's interesting. If you just stick it straight on, because there's an airtight seal around that original wheel, the middle of that sleeve was kind of bubbling outwards. So if you kind of break the seal and press that in smooth, you get a nice smooth fit, and presumably that has a suction effect that keeps it in place. So that looks great. It does sit a little bit higher than the original did, but not very much. You can do it with your thumb and finger. It's more like you're going to operate it with your fingers like this. I have to say that the claim about creating a friction interface, I'm convinced I read that somewhere, but it's absolutely not doing that. It's nowhere near to making contact with the pedestal, so that thing will still spin. But not to worry. I do think it looks better. It's certainly different in feel. You have or in a sense you can be counting, without looking at it, you can be counting the dimples as you spin it. That gives you some kind of intrinsic feedback on how much you're trimming. So that's the general aviation trim wheel. At the end of the day, is that a cost-effective upgrade? Well, it's cheap. Aerosoft sells this for €16.50, so under £20, well under £20. Changes the look. I suppose mostly it changes the look, and arguably it does. It makes it chunkier, and it looks more like a trim wheel out of something like a Twin Otter. So gets my vote. Okay, last but not least, we've got the Honeycomb Alpha or Bravo dust cover. Didn't think I'd find myself reviewing a dust cover. So it's made of, I guess, kind of rucksack material, and it's padded on the inside. It's got a Honeycomb logo and a very tongue-in-cheek "remove before flight." Let's it's a cover, it's a dust cover. But let's try it on the Bravo. Presumably that goes at the front. So I mean it's shaped so it's going to fit round. Have I done this right? It looks right. I guess there's a concession here to genericness. It's designed to fit each of these two things. It's clearly designed to clear the horns of the yoke, and so we've got a lot of squashy material left here. But I mean, it's a dust cover. It covers it up, and dust won't get in. Yeah, I mean, you really want the levers in the upper position. So there it is. It's kind of a contrived fit on the Bravo. Let's try it on the Alpha. And it's actually pulling. I think it's actually pulling the yoke in a little bit into the spring. Well, there it is. I mean, it's what it is. Again, it covers up the yoke. Arguably, this is more, I would venture, useful on the Bravo than it is on the Alpha, and that's simply because the Bravo's got open slots into which dust is inevitably going to get. I haven't dismantled this to see how well the potentiometers are protected from dust, but you've got to presume that getting dust in the pots is going to be problematic in due course. So covering up your Bravo, if you've only got one of these, which I have, then I'd be covering up the quad. If you want to buy one of these are quite pricey actually. 25-20 on the euros on the Aerosoft website, which is quite a lot for what it is. Although it is, I mean, it's well made. You can't dispute that. But the reality is, if you've got both of these devices and want to protect them both, you're paying twice that. So 50 odd euros, 50 odd pounds, no doubt, which is 20% of the purchase price of either one of these devices. Or it's probably fairer to say one of these is costs about 10% of the purchase price of the thing it's protecting. So whether that's worth it to you or whether you're just going to use a couple of bin bags, certainly looks good. So yeah, if you've got money to burn, go for it. So there you go, accessories for your Honeycomb Bravo throttle quad, and thanks very much to Honeycomb Aeronautical for the opportunity to take a look.